it comes to COVID vaccines. Can you trust that when someone says something's 95% effective or 90% effective against something, that it really is that way? On this One Belly Wednesday, what I'm going to talk to you about is my 20 years of looking at medical research and the three main tips that you need to understand if you're looking for a healthcare provider, especially for your kids, who is what we would call an evidence-informed practitioner. They're evidence savvy. So I spent a lot of time reviewing medical and science journals early on in my career. In fact, I actually had a company. That's what I did. I used to produce videos that would review those medical journals and science journals. And what I found was pretty disturbing. One was that there was a huge amount of bias, an incredible amount of bias in the publications themselves. So that a lot of people who were editing these that were supposed to be doing what they call a peer review actually had connections to major companies like pharmaceutical companies. They were involved with some kind of medical appliance manufacturing. All of that really told me that there was a little bit of bias, and it wasn't a big surprise to me that when a big study came out to kind of uncover bias in medical and science journals, they found that there really isn't a journal now that's untouched by it. As I started digging in further, I saw that there were a really just kind of a rolling conveyor belt of people who leave that kind of industry. So again, if we want to pick on Big Pharma a little bit, they usually ended up as chairs of things like the Food and Drug Administration. The very organizations that were supposed to be regulating them, they were also a part of. And so it's really tricky for me to be able to look at one or two studies and just say, oh yeah, I'm sure that has lots of credibility, because one of the things that I will always do is at the end of every single paper, I look at the numbers that the authors have. They usually do a little footnote in there to tell you all of their author affiliations, and they're supposed to disclose conflicts of interest. Generally, when I look at those, what you'll see is in addition to being a university professor, they're also getting money from somebody in order to do the research, whether it's in the form of grants. In fact, there's a Pathways article that we're going to be talking about that is really, really interesting from the perspective of other people who were past journal editors coming out and saying, yeah, actually, one of the reasons I left was that there was a ton of pressure on me to make sure certain publications got through, mainly because of this kind of bias. It's really incestuous. It's really tough to pull out. And I have to say, at a point in time where the public really, really needs good, solid information, you really need to be able to trust that. So here is the question for a lot of parents. Well, how do I find a doctor? Like, what's real to me is, how do I find a doctor who's evidence savvy, who can cut through this kind of like smokescreen stuff and really tell me as a parent what stuff is important to know? There are three main keys to it. Number one, the first question that I would ask that pediatrician or family doctor is, what journals do you regularly read and subscribe to? That's a really easy one for me. I read a lot of journals. The Journal of Vertebral Subluxation Research is one of the ones that I love to read. I also publish to the Journal of Maternal Pediatric and Family Health. There's a lot of things that I really like. Nature Science. I really get into not just stuff within my own field, but I love reading the stuff that other healthcare avenues are starting to publish and understand. That's how I learned so much about COVID, for instance, is I knew what journals I liked, what journals I trusted, and was able to find good information. The second question that I would usually ask is, have you published before? I will tell you, again, as a published author, I have had to go through the process of something called peer review, where somebody looks at your work and says, hey, listen, there's some questions that we have about it, or nope, it looks like you followed all the steps that you need in order to have a good publication. And what you're concluding really looks realistic based off of the information you're presenting here. That process of understanding peer review and understanding what goes into a study is really clarifying. It really helped me understand, when I was reading other people's work, what things I needed to ask from a critical standpoint, right? When I was critiquing someone else's paper, I had ideas of what things would fly and what wouldn't, based off of what people had asked me for during either my presentations or during my papers that I submitted. So that's the second thing. Have you ever published before? It's a really good, simple question. A lot of the chiropractors who go through the process of certification through the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association, they have to publish. It's one of the biggest criteria as far as certification is submitting that kind of stuff for publication. So yeah, it's always something that really is near and dear to my heart. We love doing research in this office. The last thing, and again, I get a lot of patients just based off of this, is when someone asks me a question and they say, hey, do you have any studies to back that up? I always say, I will get back to you on that and I'll send you some stuff. Now, what I have learned is a massive difference between chiropractors like me and the pediatricians that some of my patients have come from. A lot of times they'll have questions about things. They don't know where they stand. They're open to more information. And what they get sometimes is an attitude of, well, I'm the doctor and that's what I said. Or you've been Googling too much. Or you can't believe everything you read on the internet. That's a really dismissive way of being a partner in healthcare, in my opinion. And so what I like is providing people an informed choice. So if I have something that I want people to read, I know exactly where I have that stuff. I have files of this kind of stuff because I reference it in my own talks. I reference it in my own papers. It's stuff that I hand out to my patients on a regular basis. I know what I'm talking about because what we call evidence-informed practice involves understanding what's published in the research, understanding what patient preferences are, and then also understanding what my clinical experience of 20 years of being in chiropractic, what that's taught me. So thank you very much. I'm glad that you answered this big question about, so how do I know how to trust the science on things like that? Hopefully this answers some of those questions for you. But again, you got to reach to your own conclusions. You have to be an informed, educated consumer of healthcare in this country. There's no real excuse for you not knowing in an information age. If you found this helpful, if you have friends that have questions about things that they can trust when they're reading this kind of research, or if they have questions about things they see in the news, send this podcast to them, send this video blog to them. We come live streaming to you every single Wednesday. We do One Belly, Two Brains Wednesday on Facebook and on YouTube. I hope you guys take great care, and I'll see you next week.